about 5 to 12 on July 12th. I'm sitting with Gina Gushue in the boardroom and in the Diefenbunker. Maybe just to get started, you could talk about what you did for this job while you were there.
Okay, well, I was in the Reservist, and I was here in the summer, and as a teletype operator, so I worked in, I guess it would probably be the message center, and I lived in, and at the time there was no external buildings except for that little guardhouse kind of building, and then I remember we used to go in through the lock, and one locked door would close, and then the other one would open, and we'd come in and just worked and ate and just lived here. Yeah, and as a reservist, it was to fill in for the regular force, particularly in the summer, because they would be to give them a break between the holidays.
So when you arrived at the bunker, what was your first impression? Did you know much about it before?
I did know a bit about it because I'd been in the reserves for a couple of years, and they would talk about CARP, and CARP was very like manned fully, like it was a very much a working station, and we used to do training exercises in the area. So I knew about CARP. I don't know if a lot of people in general, and I lived in Ottawa, that it never really kind of was a place that people talked about, and I don't even think I'd heard of the term Diefenbunker for a while. You know, I think it was we just called it CARP. We were working in CARP as opposed to a specific Diefenbunker. I don't know when that term came along.
And when you first arrived, what was the security like?
What I remember is just the guardhouse. So you had to come in through the fence, like you parked on the outside. And it was so odd because you'd look and there's nothing around except a parking lot with cars and a little white building in the middle of nowhere. And then you go in through the guardhouse, and like there's no searching your equipment, like nothing like security like there is now for everything. And then you just went up, and I think you buzzed, and just got buzzed in. You just went in with one door and it closed, and then you went through the other door, and there was a security area so the cameras could see who was coming in and that sort of thing. But it was really like I don't really feel like there was like any armed guards or anything. I don't remember anything like that. Yeah.
And when you were in the bunker, what that you
a lot of restricted areas, either because they were out of bounds for everybody, or maybe sometimes because of your security clearance, you were only allowed to be in certain areas, or because I was in other rank, I wasn't allowed to go where the officer areas were. So you kind of just went to your room or a friend's room and dining room and work. Yeah. And I was saying to Heather, I remember the other thing was everybody smoked. And the place was full of smoke. You smoked in your room, you smoked in the dining hall. You didn't go outside to have a cigarette. Like it was just everybody was in here. You just lived in here.
And can you talk a little bit about the work before your family?
I think it was a mix, and I don't remember when we went for the walk today, the dorms, I didn't remember, like there's a lot of beds in the women's room. I don't remember there being so many. I don't remember sharing with like a lot of people. So I don't know if it was because the numbers maybe were down in the summer because of vacations, and that we were just more minimally staffed, or if they just had a lot of beds in case if there had been an emergency, then they needed the beds. But I don't remember ever really having to share a room with more than one person. The shower did look familiar. That There is correct setup. I don't think that's changed much, but the rooms I didn't really twig for me. I just remember kind of because you each on your own shifts, so you just kind of got up and you went to work, and you know, you hung out in the evenings and watched movies sometimes, and just kind of the mess. Yeah.
What were the rules about the men and women?
I don't remember. But probably there would have been fairly strict rules. Yeah. There wouldn't have been a lot of women, because there would have been probably mostly like administration and the teletype operators would be the only reason to have women here. Most of the support, any maintenance, and like there were even maintenance for the equipment would have been all men. There would have been no women that were doing teletype repair or communications repairs or any of that kind. There wouldn't have. I don't remember any of the cooks being women. I think it was pretty small the number of women. Right.
And for your position, men or
I would say most of the teletype operators, certainly the regular force teletype operators, would have all been women. We might have had the odd guy in the reserves that was a teletype operator, but really they tended to be more like the radio operators, and the women would have been the teletype and do secretarial, that kind of administration would have been the women. And the officers would have been, almost all of the officers would have been men. Because then when I took my officer training in the early 80s, women were just kind of starting to become more accepted. And because it was even around that time that women were first allowed into RNC, it's early 80s, I believe. And then the other thing was, because this was a communications setup and it was army, women couldn't be in battle, or in any combat roles. So you wouldn't have had many women in the trade, so they wouldn't have needed to be in here. They wouldn't have been really in here. Yeah.
how does that affect teaching or just to make your own life?
I think because for me, most of my time was with the reserves, and it was more of a community. And so I imagine it would have been the same here, that, when you were working, you were serious and everybody did their job. And then every job had its own promotion scheme. So, you everybody was just working on their careers on their own paths, and then you would have your social time. So I think it was pretty easy. But I think it was more, for me, probably more the officers versus the other ranks, or even then as another rank as probably a corporal, I would have been like really low man on the totem pole. So even the senior other ranks, we wouldn't have mixed. So you just sort of hung with your own group. So I don't think it was more men versus women as it was more your group of people. Because we had to refer to everybody by their military ranks, and being down at the bottom, everybody was pretty much a serve, the odd man, but mostly serves. And so, yeah. But then with your friends, the other operators, then it was very relaxed.
Were there spots, I don't know if you know, but were there spots in the bunker where that was all that,
in the dining room, because I think it was just the one dining room. I don't remember there being another dining room. So that would have been very relaxed in that area. But then once you went to your job, it was much more regimented.
do you have any where the officers went and the outside mess? Is that often
Yes, yes, I remember.
a bit far?
My politically correct answer would be that I was underage, so I probably didn't know. I don't know what the drinking age was then. So yeah, I don't remember really much. We were talking earlier about bringing alcohol, whether this was a dry nest or not. I don't remember it being dry, but on the other hand, maybe I wasn't of legal drinking age, but I wouldn't. But again, I'm sure you could bring in whatever you wanted because there was no real checks on the way in. So I don't know. I don't really remember. I certainly don't remember partying and drinking with a bunch of people or anything. So.
Did you guys ever go out? So
I didn't because I lived in Ottawa and full time, so it was just there for and I would do like maybe a 2-week shift here, 12-hour shifts, and then go home again. So I never really. But the one thing that we did do was a group of us got into going to Winchester, which is nearby, and doing parachute training. So we did do that. So sometimes on weekends we'd go parachuting, so skydiving, just Winchester's around this area, something like that, And so we would do that. So, and if we were off, we would go and do, either our lives in Ottawa or do typical young adult activities. We'd go camping and stuff. Yeah, around here, like those, and up into Pembroke, going towards Petawawa and that area. Yeah.
Do you remember much about
No, not so much.
Do you think that you would have known someone after that instead of
I don't have memories of really getting to know. I think because I was like a new teletype operator and young, it was probably pretty intimidating at the time, and you just kind of came in and hoped that you didn't make a mistake, and you just did your job. Didn't want to be yelled at or anything. So yeah, I don't really remember. I really remember it kind of being more just coming and doing the job and then going home and having my life back in Ottawa. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you do this sometimes. Do you have particular stories that they like to tell us?
I probably don't have any. I don't think so. I wish I did.
That's this next section. Do you feel that the Cold War had an effect on your daily life?
I think because my father was in the military, I always kind of had a little bit more of a sense that there was a worry, and my dad was in the Air Force and often was up in the northern areas and stuff. So, I mean, I guess maybe, and then with the reserves, knowing like a lot of the training exercises would be practicing for what if this happened, what if that happened. But, then you get sort of back into regular high school life and university life and didn't really give it another thought, except, we were always aware that it was us, and often us was with the Americans versus the Soviet Union. And I have young adult children now, and they have no idea, your age, like no idea. There's a whole idea that there would be a part of the world that, we're really considered to be the enemy, and that we always have to be cautious of and be careful of and just distrustful of these people, but the kind of world as well.
What did you know about the Soviet Union at this time?
That they were the bad guys, and it was pretty clear that it was us versus them, and that they had no freedoms, and that we were a democracy, and that it was very difficult to leave. And I was very into sports, and I loved the Olympics and all that, and very aware every time the Olympics came up that it was the Soviet Union athletes and the German athletes, and they were all on drugs, all on steroids, according to what we would read, and that they couldn't leave, and that they were always watched when they came to North America and Europe in case they defected. And so, yeah, it was definitely. I don't think my husband's 9 years older than I am, and so I think he's got a little bit even more aware growing up in the 60s of the true Cold War, whereas it was more still there in the 70s, more as a residual. But yeah, they worried about like the whole NORAD and worrying about the Russians coming across from the north and stuff. And it's definitely. Now, again, I don't know if I was more aware of it because my father was in the military, or if it was something that it was certainly in the media all the time. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember in
just in terms of like with defections, whenever Soviets defected, that was always being media, and then China too. We were always watching for China, and what was China going to do? And back in the early 70s, when I was in high school, mid 70s, late 70s, so 77ish, was when they started trying to break down barriers with trade, and North Americans started introducing opportunities to travel to China for trade, and which was a big thing because it was the communists, and you had to be careful with the communists. And there were activities in high school sometimes, because I was in Ottawa, at the embassies where they were trying to open the doors a little bit. And I know I went to a reception at the Chinese embassy when the junior table tennis team from China was on a tour of North America, and they wanted to meet some typical Canadian students. So I was asked to go to that, and it was a big reception. And it was a big fuss because this was so unheard of with the Chinese. And then the next year, the same thing happened with a group came from Moscow, and we did the same thing. They came into our high school, and just kind of breaking down barriers a little bit. I think at that time.
Do you think that this sort of activity by the media and the government because of our communism and Soviet Union and China, was it justified?
I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, you kind of believe it, and you don't think to question it because it's your government that's saying it. So, on the other hand, now as an adult, and I can look back with a different mind, and I could question things a bit more now that I'm an adult. I don't believe everything, but there seemed to be a definite, we were the good guys and they were the bad guys. Definitely. And I mean, China was kind of in the mix a little bit, but it was so different. Like they were a very visually looking different people and stuff, whereas the Russians, a lot of it was they could be us, right? And even the TV shows, I'm just remembering, like the TV shows for my generation were things like Get Smart, where they always had the bad guys were the Russians, the spies. And I caught an episode the other day just randomly on TV of this show, I Dream of Jeannie, that I used to watch like all the time. And now looking back, he was in the Air Force, and they had spies in that show. I'd forgotten that, but it was all like a lot of the shows had spies in them, you know, and it was always mostly the Americans were the good guys, and then the Soviet Union was the bad guys.
Do you feel that any sort of fear of the attack was real for you? I mean, how did that translate to your work with the
I don't think I ever really thought about a nuclear attack until I heard about the Diefenbunker. Like, it just didn't seem really real. And then you find out, oh, there are places that some people get to escape to and be in there. But yeah, I don't really remember worrying. I remember in history class, we would talk a lot about even back to the Second World War and about Hiroshima and that kind of talk. And that would worry me, that I would think about that and worry that that could happen again. And so you understood where it came from, this idea that, you know, we both had to have our fingers on the buttons, and there were places that they would have keys that you had to match up the keys and send off the bombs. And so there was just kind of that feeling that it was there, that it didn't kind of affect your, you know, you kind of went on with your day-to-day living. And, you know, every once in a while you would be reminded, because there seemed to always be Russian planes that were straying into North American airspace, and then you'd find out there were American planes straying into Russian airspace, and every once in a while there'd be a spy exchange or that kind of thing. So, I mean, the comedy shows were picking up things that really truly were happening. So it was kind of always there, but you didn't take it, right? Like, it didn't weigh you down worrying. You know, it didn't feel like you were worrying about it, but it was definitely, I think maybe it felt better to know that we had the same technology, or at least as good technology. And that, I think, was the basic argument, right? You build up your arms stores because then you're evenly matched. And as long as you're evenly matched, then you can relax, as long as nothing happened to really push the other one to do something about it. Yeah. And things like you know, at the height of the Cold War, back with the missile crisis in Cuba and stuff, I was a bit young for that, so I only kind of really was more aware of that as a teenager, that kind of stuff. So I didn't really get that kind of intensity where talking to my husband or my family. You know, that was a really serious time for the whole missile crisis and the Cold War. I was more in the era when the athletes were going to defect from the other country at the Olympics and things like that. You know, it didn't feel quite so real as far as weapons and things.
So then you're in the bunker and we talked about the role of there was with
Yes, yeah, that definitely weighed on people. I think that was something I do remember, and it's funny that you mentioned that. I think because I think the concept that if you were going to be in here and everything else outside is destroyed, well, what's the point? What's the point? Because you live for your families. And I probably didn't really get that issue so much, again, being very young. But for people with families, absolutely, yeah. I think it's something that I definitely thought about.
And you said you kind of like did they know much about the military, and did they have been working there?
I think my parents just kind of thought of it as a summer job. I don't think, you know, again, by then in the late 70s, I think it was just, it's more just, oh, Gina's going to do a job, and it's just some job. Yeah, I don't think they thought of it as the Diefenbunker as such. I was just really working hard. Because, yeah, I don't even think we really called it the Diefenbunker that much. I don't think it was more in working at the CFS part. No, that's good. Oh, good.
Yeah, just to online. So, can you talk a little how you actually about the policy of the law?
When I heard, I think at first I didn't really connect really what the wall really symbolized. I don't think I really, because things have been slowly happening. It's not like there's this huge thing that happened, and just like there was just a momentum, and so slowly things are happening, and suddenly the wall is down, and people are meeting across the wall and crossing over, and nobody's getting shot. And I mean, that was something I do remember over the years. And again, with the Berlin Wall, like hearing about people being shot, trying to get to their families on the other side, hadn't seen their families in generations and things. So I think it was a time of wondering, what's going to happen and how far is it going to go? And I think maybe it kind of started more with Poland and with the solidarity movement and the unions. And so again, it was things that had been building for a while. It wasn't like just randomly suddenly the wall came down. There had been a momentum going and everything. But I certainly at that time would never have imagined that things would have unfolded the way they had. Because at that time, it just did seem like it was just so official. There was the good guys and the bad guys, and not a lot of gray in between. And it was Soviet Union and these Germans against everybody else. And so then I don't think we even imagined that wall would ever come down. So I would love to go and see it. I think it's really quite the symbol for how our world has changed. My husband and I went on a cruise this year. We went to Croatia. And again, like when I was growing up, it never would have occurred to me that I'd ever get to go to Croatia or the Czech Republic, or like it was just literally such a foreign world. And we thought that they were all more backward than us, that they didn't have the same technology or, certain fashion or anything. Like it was just like it was a completely different world that we couldn't imagine. That they were living lives over there that would have been as good as ours. It really was very different, I think. Yeah.
Why do you or do you think it's
I think it's important to remember that, because again, it's just another lesson in life and in history. And again, what I was just saying about I couldn't have imagined. It's kind of interesting that we need those lessons to remind us that things will change and life can always change, and no matter how bad things can be, it will change again, and we do learn that we're not as different as sometimes our governments would like us to believe. And I know there's a whole culture to why we got to that point with the Cold War coming out of the Second World War, and why it prompted us to go that way. But I think we have to remember that we have to be. It's more than military, and it's we've got. I think nowadays we're more into communications where people are more open around the world, communicating with people from different cultures all the time and traveling. not partitioning ourselves off. I think it's good to remember that that wasn't necessarily the best time. You know, the whole thing of first man on the moon and all those competitive things aren't necessarily the way for us to go in the future. So I think it's good to remind ourselves. You know, it's just such a heightened, at times, such a heightened intensity, and you know. I think so. No, no, it's just interesting to see the old teletype equipment. Well, the one thing I would say is it's fun because then where I went after working here and finishing universities, I actually ended up in computers. And now in hindsight, looking at that equipment, I mean, a lot of that was a precursor to the computers. And now we've got our little iPhones and things, and we used to fill up a whole room with a computer. But it's interesting to see how the technology continues to change. And so it's just interesting to see how times have changed. And even my mother-in-law, she had been in the Second World War as a communications clerk. And so she would have seen even more basic stuff. But, you know, it's just the world keeps changing. Yeah.